Oh, it's touchscreen. All right. I thought you had to shake it. There's a little shakedown.
Probably about.
You're live.
So, good morning, committee and guests. This is, committee, it's an agricultural committee, Friday morning, February 9th. And our first item of business is, hearing, basically about animals running at large and, from a gentleman up from Venusburg and Riley, I'd like to welcome you to the committee. You will sit right up in that black chair under the table. And before you get started, I'd like to have the committee introduce themselves.
Yep, Brian Collmore, representing the Rutland District.
Irene Runner, the North Including Fairfax.
Brian Camping, Bennington County.
And Rich Westman is not here this morning. He had some other duties to attend to until 10:30. And I'm Bob Dart, chair of the committee from Orleans County. So I think to get started, Riley and I have talked a few times in regards to the situation. And I felt that it would warrant the entire committee to hear what he's had to go through and then try to figure out if there's a way to correct it. We gotta do a law change or something to get something to happen in a positive way. So Riley, maybe you could introduce yourself, where you're from, and tell us, tell the committee what we've discussed.
So my name is Riley Baucus. I've lived in Enosburg for a little over 10 years at my residence. And upon moving to my now residence, I had heard that this problem that I'm dealing with from a current neighbor had existed prior to that. And having grown up in Franklin County and worked for a couple farms, and my parents had cows growing up, and once in a while they get out, and that's understandable. Something spooks them, or lightning or something like that, that's understandable. This is an entirely different issue after living at my residence for 10 years and having this through it. This is very extreme. And a lot of it has to do with poor fencing and just plain negligence of operation of this so-called farm. Growing up, I can relate to cows getting out, working on farm. They get out a couple times a year. That's understandable. And that's initially what I thought on moving to Enosburg at my residence. And the person that had lived there prior to me had told me, this neighbor is a little different, and his cow's been getting out, and he indicated that there was a bull that got out, and he felt a need to go out and buy a firearm in order to protect his family. And I was like, oh, well, that's a little extreme. I can understand somebody's cow getting out and not wanting it to be there, and I don't want him there either. And that's how it started. I'd go over and see my neighbor, Larry. You got a cow out or a bull out. It's not exactly very friendly. Try to keep your cows. After several attempts, a couple of years going by, it was a repetitive issue. It continued and continued. And finally, I said, well, something else has to happen. I went to the town. And 2017 or 18, I went to the town and, sat in front of the select board members, and my neighbor was there as well. And, they recognized there was an issue. And they spoke to him and, look, you gotta keep your cows inside the fence. And, so we had the meeting and it continued. And, I kept complaining to the town. I'd send emails, I'd send pictures. And, we'll talk to him, we'll talk to him. And, in 2021, I just finally had enough. I was gonna put my foot down and that's where it was gonna stay. Something had to happen. So I, would call the state police, sheriff's office. They both, patrol east where it's split up to. And, he wants to do. We don't deal with cows, so call your animal control officer. Well, I spoke to the town about that. My animal control officer doesn't deal with cattle because they're dangerous. I have that in an email in writing. And, the town also had their attorney, send me a letter saying that this is a civil issue, and that's all it is. And through this process, I found that, under Title 24, Chapter 109, 3801 through 3816, for fence viewers, that the town has jurisdiction over fences, and that's primarily the issue. That would probably stop it. In the state of Vermont, there is no free range law. You have to have a fence or to have livestock. And that's reading the state statutes, and I've addressed this with the town. In 2022, I met with the town 7 times about this issue. And, my words have fallen on deaf ears. They've had their attorney there. They're like, well, I've asked for a ordinance. They said they'd consider it. I haven't heard resolved. And, late in 2022, I said, well, I haven't heard the answer from you guys about an ordinance. And, their lawyer was there and said, well, you can get 60 signatures, but you'll need approval from the select board. I said, boy, that's a big waste of time for me. I've been here 7 times since 2022. And, I need 60 signatures now, but I also need your approval. I can't get an answer from you now. Why would I expect you to get an answer? I mean, after 60 signatures. And, so I haven't done it. This is my remedy.
So, you want to explain, about the septic system issue?
Well, there's not currently an issue, but, there's been a lot of damage, to my property. I took this gentleman to a small claims court and received over $5,000 in damages because of this cattle being on my property. They ruined my lawn, which I've had repaired. I've tried to repair it myself. I've had somebody else do it. Gone through my garden. I've had to put a fence up around my garden. I've had to go out by trail cameras, so to monitor my property. I mean, it's an awful thing to try to go to work in the morning, you know, that it's not if, but when. The cows get out, you're gonna come over, and it's terrible to think of what you're gonna come home to. It's extremely aggravating, stressful. Somebody shouldn't have to go through the process. I've been going through it for basically 10 years.
And, the other issue that, I think maybe Senator Wayne, brought in, pictures of the fence that, that was really
Yeah,
not a fence. I mean, it was just a bunch of junk wire kind of hooked to broken posts and so the fence that's there is not.
oh, it's not sufficient at all. I mean, I've taken pictures and, the cattle are standing right there next to the fence. And it's up to maybe their shin, not even halfway up their legs in places. As well as, the gate crossing being opened every day. Bring a truckload of feed, into the pasture. Leave the gate down all day. When he's done, put it up when he leaves. He doesn't put it up when he crosses into or out. Um, One thing I haven't mentioned is, in 2021, cows were out, from August 20th to December 14th. Consecutively. And that's not including prior events. In 2022, they were out over 24 times. Last year, they were out over,
Do they get out? They're gone in the winter?
they stay in during winter. I mean, there's no reason why they should be out. There's nothing for them to eat outside the fence and cover.
But the animals take them, the owners take the animals to a barn and
No, they're pastured year round.
they're outside year round. And are they rotated animal,
I don't believe so. I think there's probably maybe 100 acres of pasture land there, and I mean, I'm not sure what his farming practices are, or if he has any. This property is in very poor shape. And if you were to drive by his home, you wouldn't think anybody lived there. It looks condemned. There is a barn on the property. He doesn't visit the house, the cow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just trying to get the landscape, so to speak here. How many cows are we talking about? And are there other neighbors that are having similar problems with this particular situation?
There are other neighbors that have had problems, including one of the select board members, but he's told me that he's brought him to court or something along those lines, and but he won't honor my complaint when I bring this issue to him. He thinks I'm making it up.
And how many cows are we talking?
Right now he has about 20. 2021 he had over 40. And I'm not sure what he actually does with them. They're more or less pets, from what I understand. In 2021, I understood that there was somebody else that was basically leasing his pasture and housing cows on property, but ultimately he was taken care of by what I gathered.
So you get no results from town officials. Did you talk with the state's attorney in regards to the issue or?
Well, after going through the issue in 2021 and after making so many complaints to the state police and sheriff's office, in about December, they decided, this guy's probably not making it up. Maybe we should actually do something. So they said, okay, well, we'll come out and see what's going on. But when we have gone out in the last few times, we don't see the cows. My explanation was, well, I told you where the cows were to go up a couple hours later, the cows are gonna move. And most of the time when they show up, the car now, so and they're not getting out of the car to go investigate. They're just gonna go knock on the door, hey, cows are out, we got a complaint for your neighbor. Now the state police want me to fill out an affidavit. driving down to the station, have a sign, they don't even show up. State's attorney, in 2022, after the issue of 2021 and all my complaints in 2022, after receiving the pictures and the emails, the state's attorney came to my property, viewed damage to my property, and said, okay, this is legitimate, we're gonna prosecute this. And the prosecuting attorney at the time was John Lavoy. I'm sure you all know he got in trouble. And upon taking it to Franklin County Court, they thought maybe this is a better issue for the restorative justice program. I immediately told them this is a big waste of time of the taxpayers' money, my time, your time, and restorative justice program's time, because he's not going to do anything. He hasn't done anything in the time we lived here. He's not going to do anything now. And I was right. We went through the process and he failed to meet the criteria that they were asking for. And they told him to repair his fence. He didn't do it. And so it went back to the Franklin County State's Attorney's Office. And at that time, Mr. Lavoy was in trouble. And this case got referred to Diane Wheeler, the state's attorney now. And she dismissed the case without prejudice because the current fine is anywhere between $10 and $3 or $2 according to statute. And it's a joke. And that's what John Boyd told me when he took the case. And I called and made a complaint. I've made a complaint to the state's attorney and sheriff's office about this. And they told me, well, can't do anything for you because the state's attorney is the most powerful person in your county. And they can take or not take any case that they feel necessary. And it's not worth the court's time, correct?
Senator.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So there is a law in the books, and this we'll probably get into later, but there's a law in the books that is being broken right now. And you're saying that the police, neither the police nor the sheriff are responding to a law that is on the books.
Correct. They'll respond, but not immediately. And it's at their discretion. So if they come out, if I call today, they might come out later this afternoon, or they might come tomorrow or the next day.
Do we know the statute statewide for this issue? Like, you know, like, I don't know if there is one or.
Well, I know, towns have a fence viewer,
Right.
and usually that person goes and checks the fence out. Then they turn it over to the constable if there's a violation or select. But we have Ted Brady with us and we have Tim Dumont with us from the state's attorney's office, and might want to, Tim is still leaving a bit, so maybe we'll have Tim out and see what jurisdiction they have maybe in this particular situation. So Riley, if you want to let Tim and we'll get you back.
I think you're gonna switch out.
I won't be long.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning. Tim Leaders Dumont, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Absolutely. And I spent a little bit of time in House Agriculture this year, but I always appreciate getting out of some of the other committees. I spend most of my time in. So thanks for having me in today. It's a nice environment, nice change of taste.
Yeah.
But first of all, the League of Cities and Towns did put out something on their website about a Superior Court case here in Washington County having to do with a quite similar issue, cabin. I think it explains some of the issue very well, the outdated nature of the fine only, ranges between $4 to $10. Some elevated ones for feral swine, if you look deeper. But basically, it is an outdated law. And right now, the criminal justice system is facing 21,600 pending cases spread across 72 attorneys. So we are in a crisis capacity moment that I would be remiss not to mention in every committee that I'm in. And so there is the policy decisions of mostly the judiciary committees of the last 10 years that there's a presumption of restorative justice, as your first witness talked about, particularly for offenses where there's no threat of incarceration. And this would be one of those situations. There's also a host of civil rights of action, presumptive civil court actions that are available for individuals to pursue. And if those aren't complied with, as we've seen recently in southern Vermont, even environmental courts can issue arrest warrants that could potentially result in detention, thinking about the alleged paramilitary situation in southern Vermont, where someone was non-compliant with the town's attempts to get someone in compliance. So it is a collage of outdated law that parades over this area, and it is very serious when there's cattle running, livestock running, horses running, the old terms of swine, pigs, et cetera, running all over the place. There's been instances of law enforcement having very serious car crashes with animals across major roads in Vermont. And that combined with the increase of fatalities on our roadways from DUI and drug intoxication makes for a pretty terrible potential situation for individuals. I did want to say there is some potential other options. Law enforcement is severely understaffed in the state right now in terms of, when I say law enforcement, I mean state police, et cetera. And there's some of the factual scenarios I was hearing, although the dismissal without prejudice allows the state to bring the case back, just so you're aware, under the statute of limitations. But cruelty to animals could be something that could, under current law, be pursued depending on the things. Let's say an animal was actually injured by a car going through in this situation, and the right shelter, no shelter was provided for that animal, and then it resulted in very serious injury, et cetera. There have been instances where negligence, the reasonable care that someone owes in Vermont to anyone is ignored, and you can be very creative as a prosecutor and try all sorts of different pathways. Obstructing traffic by disorderly conduct. It's sort of like jazz, improvised when you don't have all the facts that fit into a statute neatly. But I wanted to note that we do have some enforcement, staffing, capacity issues in terms of what we can do and look into. And I know Deputy State's Attorney Wheeler quite well, and she has probably 500 or so pending cases herself. And so each case is very serious on its face, but we are facing about 80 pending homicides in the state right now as well. And so when each case is distinct and each victim's case is very important to us, but we also have very limited time and capacity right now. So it's sort of a confluence of things that bring this sort of fascist scenario into a kind of unfortunate standing. And the last thing I'll mention is that there has been an issue with, I also sit on the Criminal Justice Council for the department, and there has been conversation about whether or not, I don't know if your committee has seen it yet, a central person or department should handle animal-related criminal control issues. I think it's H626. And the contemplation in the bill is that there'd be like a central resource, essentially, housed in an agency in the state government that would be in charge of training officers to effectively spot issues, because there is actually some very powerful tools that animal control officers in the municipalities can exercise, seizing animals, and then it's very expensive, as our friend Ted Brady, to actually store the animals. It's on the cost of the town. And so, for example, in this situation, if the town were to seize the 20 animals, it would run up quite a bill as a point of concern, uncontemplated. So I wanted to flag a bunch of reasons why, I wasn't surprised to hear some of the story that you heard this morning. And it's true that there was a transition in that office as well, which made it even more probably upsetting for the victim involved. So, and the restorative justice process is not suited to every situation. which is something that we've seen. About 60% of our pending cases in the state right now are for repeat offenders. And those are folks that sometimes struggle with that process. And I don't know the factual history here. I was learning about it a bit as the gentleman before me was talking, but I'd be happy to circle back with the state's attorney's office up in Franklin, if helpful. I will note that at some point, if the case is not prosecuted, sort of awkwardly in our laws, that the record of it may be sealed or expunged, and then we have to pretend as though it never existed, which is very frustrating for victims. And if an individual, for example, let's say this case is eventually expunged, and the victim wanted to pursue a civil action, we would have to respond with the following phrase in statute: no such record exists. So bringing the issues of judiciary into your committee is probably not something that's particularly enjoyable, but I thought I'd flag about 50 things that I noted with this situation.
Well, you would think that Franklin County is a pretty big dairy county, and I know everybody's busy, but you think that after 8-10 years, you'd get somewhere with a complaint that's dragged on that long. But questions for
And the current laws, I did take a quick look. There's the $10 fine for allowing both cattle, horses, sheep, and goats to go into a yard belonging to a townhouse, church, or schoolhouse with its property closed. To the burial ground, there's an elevated fine of $25. Animal goes to a burial ground area. Land or premises of another, which is seemed to fit the situation here. That's a $10 fine. The individual may also recover civil damages in a civil action for bulls. It sounds like there's potentially a bull involved here. If such a bull is more than 9 months old and found unattended outside the premises owned or occupied by the owner or keeper of such a bull, and shall be liable to a party damaged by such a bull while outside the premises of the keeper. So if the bull were to cause damage, certainly there's some pathways there for civil, et cetera, with rams and stallions and other animal types. But it's an old series of laws.
yeah, well, I mean, a $10 fine. You know, that's it can't be, it's been changed in years.
And no threat of incarceration either. So with no threat of incarceration, the individual under existing law wouldn't have the right to a defense attorney, and therefore it's sort of, pro se defendant. It can be very difficult to navigate the criminal justice system as well.
Questions?
It's currently $100 fine for bulls over 9 months.
$100.
I'm not sure.
I would like to elaborate on
When Kim leaves, we'll get you back on.
Yeah, any other questions? I'd be happy to also circle back if there's anything you think of.
No, thank you. That's informative.
No,
Sorry to be doom and gloom.
well, we wanted to understand what the law is. And thank you for coming in. I know you have another engagement, so.
Be happy to come back.
So, to me, it seems like the solution is to get a fence put up. And that would solve a whole bunch of problems here. I guess I'd be looking for any suggestions as to how we could compel this individual to do it. It sounds like our victim has tried his best with the person-to-person contact. I don't know how many times you've asked him to take care of his cows or whatnot. The local municipal officials don't seem to have a particular interest in solving the issue. Are there other ways that we could compel this person to? And I don't know how long a fence or how big the fence is, how much money's involved with putting a fence up, but that's another question.
Yeah, I would say the municipality has probably the strongest standing potentially, just based on the law that they referenced in the league's website was a Superior Court decision. So it's persuasive evidence potentially of what another court could look at, but unless the Supreme Court were to find the same thing, it wouldn't be the law of Vermont necessarily. But it did illustrate what the municipality may try to do. In this situation, I was trying to think, it's difficult when an individual doesn't have the means to build a fence. And I do not know anything about this situation, but that sounds like it's a possibility here. And in that situation, it's difficult. I mean, you could enhance or bring these laws up to date so that there's actual penalties involved for the individual, because a $10 fine is not going to be a deterrent in 2024 or any impetus to change the circumstances. If a case were to be brought in civil court, or if there was an environmental action on the individual that was pursued by the municipality, like there had been another situation recently, and the court were to find the individual in contempt, the individual could be subject to detention. The old term is to purge the individual into compliance. So if the individual were ordered by the court to put up a fence to remedy the situation, and they refused to do so, the court could detain the individual until they comply. So that you could update the existing laws relating to the animals running amok, for lack of a better term, and that may be the impetus needed to get someone to be motivated to make a change. In terms of the criminal landscape, I'm not a civil practitioner other than post-conviction relief cases, which don't particularly fly here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, any other questions?
Thank you.
And it's good to see you all.
Good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, at some point in the future, my name is John Braban. I'm speaking, I guess, as a citizen resident of Calais. I served on the select board Calais for 18 years and was embroiled in, I'm not sure if Ted brought it up, the horse issue. We have a person who has psychological issues, and we have had the horses in confinement at not to be disclosed locations. It's cost the town tens of thousands of dollars. And so I'd love to speak to that, to your committee, in terms of the strengths of the law and the weaknesses and the costs and the difficulty in finding housing. That's for the livestock. That's a huge issue. So,
Well, we'll set up a scheduled time. Yep. So maybe we'll hear from Ted and then get that. So Ted, welcome to the committee and the League of Cities and Towns. Wanted to just get a perspective of, your thoughts behind how to get the town activated and trying to resolve this issue.
Thanks. For the record, Ted Brady from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It's good to see you all. Yeah, this is a common one for us, actually. A lot of towns contact us and say, how do we handle livestock and domestic animals running afoul, as Tim put it. I don't that. Wonder if that includes fowl. Sorry. No. We unfortunately don't have great news for them, because there really are kind of 3 remedies to the problem, and none of them are. Tim mentioned them, Riley mentioned them. The first is there's kind of self-executing law, which Tim talked a little about, which is Title 20, Chapter 191, which sets up a fine schedule that a town or any other law enforcement agency could enforce. It's obviously way out of date, as you heard. The second is by really a private right of action, which civil the individual being impacted could obviously go to court and deal with that. And the third is less obvious, and I would say in a murky area, as Tim just talked about, which is that a town could place an ordinance in effect.
The town could
Put an ordinance regulating domestic animals in effect. The law, though, does not specifically and explicitly give towns that authority. The court case that Tim was talking about ruled that towns can in that county. So it doesn't apply statewide, but there's a law at 24 VSA section 2291. And we think it would be good to add into that law language that specifically authorizes towns to regulate domestic livestock. That is up in the air. In the case we're talking about here, obviously that would require the town to actively take an ordinance up. So I don't want to pretend like that would maybe solve Riley's problem, but it would absolutely give towns the authority. We get a lot of questions about this and we have to say, well, the law is kind of gray here. You can try it. We don't know if it'll stand up. The final, and this is outside of those three I just mentioned, the final kind of just asterisk is, as John mentioned, in Callis, the town impounded some horses that were in need of some attention. That right in the law is not restricted to the town. Anybody actually could impound animals that are running wild and notify the animal owner and essentially, again, you end up in court, right? To try to recover or have the ability to sell those animals to discharge whatever damage has occurred, to recoup any costs for any damage that's occurred. That's obviously a much more complicated one that I never wished upon anybody or any town to have to do, because it's complicated to find a home for a bunch of big animals, feed them, care for them, and then engage with the owner in a court dispute. So the summary is there are three things you can do. Fourth, that is much more difficult, but you can in theory do that fourth. Finally, we can have some questions. I've heard some reference to fence viewers. I am proud to say this is the first time in my career at VLCT anybody has asked me to testify about fence viewers. The role of fence viewer is extremely limited.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Limited or unlimited?
limited, extremely limited.
Okay.
Also not well practiced. And just to give you an idea, it doesn't have much to do with preventing the domestic animals from running at large. On the request of a select board, the fence viewer examines fences within the town to determine who is responsible for maintaining a fence that divides two parcels. I want to be clear, for a fence that's already there dividing two parcels, not deciding if a fence should be built, not compelling somebody to build a fence. With regard to livestock, this is, I don't know how a fence viewer would determine this, but when the land of two property owners is being pastured by both, I want to be clear, the language clearly says by both, so it doesn't say by one, and the neighbor is not pasturing animals. The fence viewer can make a recommendation to the select board for how many animals can be pastured there without a fence. So
Without a fence.
without a fence. So that law seems like it might have been from another time. I don't know. And the Supreme Court has in Vermont has held the duty created by the statutes to build and share the responsibility of maintaining fences is inapplicable to those landowners without livestock. So what I'm saying there is it appears that the fence viewer at one point was absolutely about livestock, right? And about making sure neighbors were getting along. But the current law doesn't give the fence viewer the ability to intervene effectively, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, in something like what the witness today is talked about. It's a really limited role. So and I would not encourage the committee to consider giving fence viewers, which are really an outdated municipal position, more authority to do that, given the ambiguities and confusion around that position town to town.
But, yeah, Vermont's rural landscape has changed to some degree. And it seems like, the farms always butted right up against the village or villages, and nowadays the small farms have kind of disappeared. People have not wanted to live right in the village, so they bought farmland outside of the village. And then they decide that, they want a pony for the kids and some chickens and whatnot. And then the neighbor buys the next parcel of land and they end up over on the neighbor's property, like that's occurred in Riley's situation, you know, it doesn't make for a very pleasant neighborhood. And, you know, I don't know, we may have to spend some time and rewrite or update that whole area of the statute to come into compliance with the way people are living today. I know years back, we had an issue where one farmer was a neighbor to a land. Neighbor came in and bought right up to the farmer neighbor. They got to fighting over who builds which fence. And it always used to be, you shared that. They built half, and you built your half. And the homeowner, of course, didn't have the money to build their half. And I mean, that was a mess. So,
If I was going to make any recommendations, it would be to increase the fine structure, increase the fines that needs to be dealt with. And the second thing, our members are asking us for specific authority to regulate domestic animals in ordinance authority. So if there's just one sentence you could add to that authority, which I don't want to pretend it's going to magically solve this particular case, but it would reduce the likelihood of this happening in other towns.
yeah, any questions from Craig?
Brian, thank you.
Thank you for coming in and
Good to see you all.
Yeah, good to see you too, Ted. Sorry. It happened, I remember when I was young, I lived on Maury Hill Road in Stratford. Cows would get out. But never did any damage.
Riley, you want to come back?
One thing I haven't mentioned, and this is probably the most important part of it, is, where the cows are housed, it's actually across the road from my property.
You're not
told
on the-
Robert this, but, I don't abut the property.
Busy road.
Yes. It is dirt road, but, it's pretty busy. It's not a highway, but it's busy, I feel, for a class 3, dirt road.
And I don't know if I've ever asked you this, but how big is your farm?
My property is 3.67 acres.
So you fence your property to keep his animals off your property.
Yeah,
It would be,
well,
Oh, that's interesting.
the select board has mentioned that to me, and, I've, told them I'm not putting a fence around my property. There's no current law for that in the state of Vermont.
no,
There is law though for a fence for people who have animals.
yeah.
And, which, I think Ted mentioned. I've also been told, Ted mentioned, some things about the, animal control being, or anyone being able to, catch, the animals.
Oh,
And, under state statute, currently, Title 32, Chapter 17, for impounders and pound keepers, there is an actual fee for, the impounder, pound keeper, or whoever, for each head of whatever animal. On statutes, it indicates, cattle, 12 cents, sheep, 2 cents, swine, 8 cents.
12 cents.
Which obviously is a burial law, which are all of these. But, in regards to the animal control, I've been told by the town that the animal control officer, won't be catching, cattle in my situation. Based on the reason of, they're dangerous animals, large dangerous animals. And they have no place to house them. Although 2 of the select board members on the committee in my town, have medium-sized to large-sized farms. Um, I'm not sure, if that matters or not, but I would think that if you're a select board member, you'd be more than willing to help, someone in this kind of situation in your town. So that's just my opinion, but
Riley, do you know if this individual has been fined yet by anybody and whether he's paid the fine?
State police have told me that they would, issue a citation, whether or not he's been, having to pay that, or if they've just been throwing it out. I don't know that. I know a lot of my complaints have been thrown out. Basically all, not if we gone to court, I'm aware.
Brian, finish your questions. Would you remind me how many times has this happened?
Well, they were out for over 90 days in 2021, from August 20th to December 14th. They were out, 2022, they were out over 24 times. Last year, they were out over 12 times. That's not including prior events in 2021 or events that I'm not aware of that other neighbors are aware of. And I'm not sure on previous to 2020. I mean, they're out. Yeah, a ridiculous amount of times, I feel, more than a handful of times.
Was there an attempt to move the animals out of there and the truck came and there was an incident in regards to
Yes.
the trucker not loading the animals or?
So in 2021, after making countless complaints to the town, the zoning administrator, the current zoning administrator, attempted to negotiate with the property owner and the cattle owner.
Is that
to
the
try-
same person? or
Yes.
Two different people.
Well, so my neighbor, Larry, in this case, he along with someone else, from what I'm gathering, both own cattle on his property. And, in 2021, the zoning administrator for the town of Venusburg, attempted to get someone to move the cattle. And, I'm not sure if that person owns some of the cattle or not, but, they were trying to move the cattle for several weeks. And, I would check in maybe once or twice a week and ask them, are you getting anywhere? This problem is still persisting. And well, it's hard when they're in pasture, they're not tame animals, really, they get a little wild. It's not like they're in a garden, they're around people or docile. So they moved, maybe 20 cows off the property. But, during that time, the cows had gotten out. And, a neighbor of mine took video. And in that video, Larry was out in the pasture beyond my property, on the opposite side of the road of his. And he was shooting at the animals in order to get them going, in order to get them back into his property.
The owner of the animals.
Yes, okay. From what I'm told, he was, shooting at them or shooting in the air with a shotgun. I received a call from my, girlfriend that day. She was concerned. She could see the individual, the video was taken in the field beyond the woods of my property and my house. When my girlfriend heard the shooting from inside our house, he was in the woods and she could see him. And his gun was pointed in the direction of our house. And he was trying to corral the cattle.
To move them out or to get them
To
back into the
Move them
woods?
back into the fence. I immediately said, call police. I called the police and they showed up and they investigated. But obviously the cows had been in the fence at that time and the person was no longer there.
So. It's a hard situation to deal with a neighbor. That's not agreeable to any. That's for sure. Is there anything else you wanted to offer the community?
I think the, having, someone mentioned, Bill, about, House Bill 626, livestock,
Yeah.
like a livestock commission person. I think that's a great idea.
I do feel that, the fence viewers are an outdated resource. In my case, they're not doing anything. However, I would like to mention, Title 24, Chapter 109 has a lot more, areas that fence viewers are responsible for. Specifically 3801 through 3860. And in those areas, it describes sufficiency of fence, maintenance of fence, mentioned after down fence, damages, liability. And they also, not to read all through these, but they also, have, responsibilities for, estimating fence value, and structure of the fence pertaining to whichever animal, whether it's horses or pigs or cows. Like I've said, I've tried voicing this to the town and, they can. It's something that they can recover funds for. They can catch the animals, yes. They can also sell the animals. They have to go through certain criteria, but they can sell the animals to recover some funds.
But it sounds like the town isn't.
No,
cooperating to-
No, the town isn't cooperating at all. And that's another issue. I'm not sure if you want me to elaborate on that, but I found that there might be a conflict of interest within the town select board, and that's the reasoning why they're not.
Well, in a small town, sometimes things like that happen.
Yes, which is unfortunate. It's like that.
That's very. Questions from the community. I think we certainly got a good picture of your situation and understanding of that. I don't know what to tell you about the remedy, but we'll certainly look at those statutes and hopefully Ted from the League of Cities and Towns will call somebody in Enosburg and see if he can call him a little bit to get going on this, because it isn't healthy to let something like this fester and it gets to a point where people could even get hurt. And over, animals spoiling their lawn, septic system or whatever.
Yeah. I've called a lot of people about this issue. I've called the Agency of Agriculture, Agency of Natural Resources. I've had the vets from the Agency of Agriculture come out But they're like, well, he's feeding cows in their pastures year round, there's food there. And there's places for them to drink water, so we can't really help you.
And they've got woods to go in, I presume.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, as long as they have, shelter of some type.
Yeah.
Food and water.
And the Agency of Agriculture ultimately doesn't deal with cattle, they deal with marketing, grains, that type of thing. In the Agency of Natural Resources, they deal with water. So as long as there's not a water pilot, they can't do anything either.
Is there a brook there or just,
There's a pond on the property and, there's wetland, swamp in the back of the property. So,
no, like if the animals were running in a brook, or something like that, there'd be a possibility of a violation, but
right,
it's a farm pond or
right.
wetlands that, that don't go directly to a brook. It's, kind of limited on their part.
Yeah.
I would like to say though that, during my research for this, I called other towns and asked what their policies were for fence viewers. And, a lot of the other towns were just, very surprised and appalled that this situation has, gone on for this long. They were wondering why no one has done anything about it. I'm wondering the same thing. And,
10 years is a long time.
And, I mean, just to tell you a little bit of what I've gone through, a little bit more is, I've been told that I've been making this up and I've been made a mockery of and when I mentioned someone shooting at the cattle to the select board, they said, well, it's like cowboys. And, like, well, if you want to put it that way, kind of, but, it's not a joke. It seems like they think it's a joke.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. For instance, St. Albans made an ordinance for situations like this. I gave, had a pig issue. Someone's pig was running at large and, they had their regulation is, the animal control goes out and say, keep your animals inside the fence or maintain a good fence. If I have to come out here again, you're gonna get a fine. And they fine me. And, I have a paper somewhere that says, how much they fined them or whatever, and this is new, this is just this past year that they've done this. But, for fence viewers, most towns, recognize, the current statutes, which are on books. And, I mean, I printed these off the legislative website, I looked them up, so, their current statutes, as far as I'm concerned. And, to disregard those is appalling. That's a taxpayer citizen.
Thinking you're right, Chair. I mean, Ted Brady, I think making a call is a productive step.
Well,
I think it could help. It's a lot.
From what the town of Venusburg has told me, they've called the, League of Cities, Towns and, apparently they told the civil issue. Maybe that they, didn't listen to the other options, but,
it's one of 3 or 4 different.
Right.
If not the only thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, are there any other questions?
No, thanks.
No, thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
So, speak. I'll have to get,
I'll be back.
Michael here and what those statutes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
get those updated and, Now, if we have time to do that, maybe we could look at the penalties as well and get those up to.
I'm hoping your head will also.
You want to testify on this issue?
I don't want to take up Kyla's time. I think she's sitting there. She's important, but I just give you a minute. Well, sworn in, right? John Bravant and, former Cal select, AT troops. There's ongoing litigation in town of Callis. Four horses have been confiscated. One was a stallion, young stallion, and 3 mares, and they've been housed at separate facilities. I would suggest that your committee invite both me to testify, and if I can get him to do it, our attorney, Joseph McLean. He may be limited in what he can say, specifically because there's ongoing litigation, but he could discuss in depth, me maybe sitting next to him, about what we've gone through in town of Callis. We do have an ordinance, and the Washington Superior Court did recognize that ordinance as, because that was challenged by a woman whose horses were running amok and confiscated her attorney. And the judge said, no, they have the authority, but again, that's county decision, not a Vermont Supreme Court decision.
Where's John from?
Pardon me?
Where's John from?
He's a Burlington attorney, but he's a municipal attorney. He's used to, I think it's still called Stitzel and Page. I'm not sure if Steve Stitzel's retired. But he does municipal law. And he's been dealing with this issue for, I don't know, 4 years. We've had the horses in custody, I guess, for 2 years, and that's going on 2 years. And just so you know, towns are reluctant because they don't feel they have the authorities you heard. They're also reluctant because there are no facilities to house them. We were fortunate because of, I'm not gonna get too much detail, we were able to find folks who were willing to accommodate them, and it took a little doing. They didn't even have the facilities, and I think they built a facility for these horses. We had to agree on a price. So those bills have yet to, we have the right to seek reimbursement for that. But the legal costs, I don't know what they're up to. I would venture $30,000-$40,000. We are not entitled to reimbursement of our legal costs, which are substantial. And this individual has, let's just say, a pretty large inheritance and has personal mental health issues and believes that her horses talk to her. And I even went through, you've heard that some selectmen, I think it was last fall, I probably spoke, selectmen have farms where they could house them. I actually, in order to mitigate this before we actually confiscated and to mitigate the phone calls coming in and us running around at all hours of the day and night, I offered to take and house her horses on my farm, and I did for a season. But she actually would purposefully set them loose because the horses told him that they had a conversation with Mother Nature and they were born wild and they belong wild. So these were running down Route 14, which is a very busy road. As you know, the Casella trucks or the Mr. Bolt's trucks run up and down there, starting like 6 a.m, full tilt. And these horses were running up twice up and down Route 14. And that was in Woodbury Township, just over across the border. And she had property there and they would go to and from. So, but I'd be happy to come and talk to you at some length, and we can tell you what the strengths are and where we've been successful in court on our case, what has been upheld, what the pains and costs that we've gone through, and where the weaknesses are. I would suggest put in your minds, plant the seed of maybe, assisting humane societies to have large animal housing facilities. So that, and maybe it's county by county, maybe it's a couple of counties, because they're not always needed. But when you have to confiscate from 30 pigs or 5 horses or whatever, you need to have something and pretty immediately available and someone to care for them. So.
Thank you, John.
And I'll leave my card, you can reach me. And I'll reach out to John Lane.
David,
Sir.
yeah, welcome. Yeah,
How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for making some time today.
yes.
I emailed over a proposal. I don't know, I unfortunately sent it super early this morning.
It's on their web.
Okay, it's on the webpage. I'm happy to, I've got a hard copy as well. If
Yeah.
It's easier.
Mr. Chair, my heart's happy.
Thank you. Of course. And this is obviously.
Good, one more and I'll leave it for.
Yep, absolutely. Brandon, although actually, I might start with the tractor conversation that we left off
Yeah.
last week. I sent a document along that had been forwarded to me by the folks who manufacture this electric tractor, which is called Monarch. And they evidently Vermont is in discussion with the EQIP program. I guess we're a part of it, but we're not actually a part of this one statute, which allows for essentially the either purchase or a subsidy to take out of use a diesel tractor and put in use an electric tractor.
I think they have a program at the Ag Agency for that.
They do, okay,
Because
yeah,
somebody just did that.
Hmm.
We had a picture of the tractor and then there's
Yeah.
the one of the reports that we got,
okay,
the electric tractor.
Yeah.
It was orange, I think.
okay, different manufacturer, but I think we're gonna see more moving forward, so.
And of course, they do the equipment.
Program already, yeah, so. I'll dig into it a little bit more with them. We're setting up a time for a demonstration at our vineyard in probably late May, early June, whenever the ground's dry, although who knows?
Yeah.
It's spring right now. And the plan, I work with the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability folks as well, Sam Smith over there. And so I've sort of reached out to him and to Terry Bradshaw over at UVM Extension, because I think the size tractor that we're looking at would also be beneficial for orchard managers, vegetable growers, because it's a somewhat smaller footprint than a lot of the larger scale tractors.
Yeah, the one you were talking about is 50 horses.
40 to 60, I think they said. You can kind of look at it somewhere in that spectrum, but yeah, fully functional, semi-automated, which would be huge as far as sort of labor concerns for farmers. I don't think it can spray automated right now, but it can mow and take care of some of the more basic tasks in an automated fashion, which is impressive. So,
Oh, yeah, without an operator.
without an operator, yeah. And so, I mean, because it's electric, it has the technology on board right now is sort of what you can find on a $200,000 tractor, because it's already set up for all the electrical. So they're wild. I mean, the price tag right now is high for most fruit farmers or vegetable farmers. So for a 50 horsepower tractor, $75,000 is high. But if there's a subsidy in place and then something for replacement of their current tractor, they might get it within shooting distance. And
Yeah.
that could be exciting. And they seem to run off one charge, which is huge. So anyway, something for future discussion. This proposal I put together is really just a jumping off point more than anything else. The Vermont Grape and Wine Council has not been super active. The crop of grapes in the state of Vermont has not been a huge crop. We did the presentation last year, kind of discussing about the 150 acres that we grow currently in the state. I think where we are right now is we're in the shift that has happened in a lot of other places where grapes are grown, which is from retirees and people who have made a bunch of money doing something else, who put in vineyards for fun and because they're beautiful and it's fun to make wine on the side. And we're moving into a place where we have a lot of young farmers, entrepreneurs, people moving into the state or who live here already and are excited to farm grapes, but they're not sitting on a retirement fund or on their former career to help them. And so the biggest challenge to growing grapes is really the upfront investment. I think as a crop, and a lot of what we talked about last year was sort of the benefit of the hybrid grape varieties that we work with respect to climate challenges that are coming and are here. They're not coming, they're here. And the diversity of sort of those plantings, the fact that it keeps a lot of the state or could potentially add a lot to the state agriculturally. And then historically, grapes are grown in places where other crops are less successful. That's just the history for 2,000, 3,000 years of growing grapes. Really, it's been you plant grapes on the hillsides around places where you don't need to farm the food crops. And so there's a lot of real estate that has potential to be farmed in Vermont with grapes that just isn't being utilized right now because it's not useful for more traditional.
So high and dry ground is what grapes need.
Dry is the main thing. And people are like, oh, 2 years ago we had the drought all summer. People are like, oh, are you worried about this? Are you needing this? I'm like, no, this is ideal actually for us. If it rains, fine, and we deal with that last summer being kind of the opposite exception. But
How
well drained is the main
How
thing.
big a plot is economically feasible?
6 to 10 acres is kind of a decent place to make for at least one family to make a living.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
And that's kind of so New Mexico put in, and I think it just went into place last year, they call it a vine restoration program because New Mexico's been planted since Spanish settlement, 500 years ago. So they now are looking at replanting vines. I don't know that, well, I'm not going to talk to New Mexico about the challenges that they have faced, but they basically went to their government, the state government, and said, if we were able to put $1 million into vine planting right now, we'd be looking in 5 years at $10 million over the next 10 years to coming back into the economy. And that's some of the numbers that I kind of laid out here is saying, okay, one of the biggest challenges, especially for people like myself, and I've got a lot of young colleagues, younger than I am, actually, I'm coming to this from a different career, but without the retirement fund. But a lot of my colleagues are in their 20s and early 30s and want to plant grapes. You can see the upfront challenge is looking at $17,000 an acre to plant and trellis a vineyard.
So it's expensive.
It's expensive. And then the bigger challenge is that when you're talking to a lender, you're saying to them, I also am not going to grow any grapes for wine production for 3 years. And then that wine goes into the bottle and I'm looking at year 4 or 5 when I start to recoup that investment.
And I've never been in that business before, but would you take a chance on me?
Yeah, 100%. That's the big challenge, right? And so we've got right now the situation where we've got about 4 wineries that are operating on a production scale where they employ have multiple employees, multiple acres. But even those companies are sort of scrambling for grants and looking for additional funds to try and upgrade their equipment, upgrade their winery work and their vineyard work. And a huge part of that is that we don't have any infrastructure right now. There's no company here that can loan me a piece of equipment for harvest because my press or something went out. And so we're in the sort of startup phase of an industry that I think has a huge amount of potential. And so really the conversations amongst the growers of grapes right now is how do we get more vines in the ground? Because that's the thing that's going to get us to sort of tip that scale, as it were, to the place where we can actually have a really vibrant industry. Right now, people are scrambling. Most grape growers that aren't established in a vineyard already are doing cider, where they can scramble and find people's wild apple trees and things like that, which is a great use of a crop that basically falls on the ground most fall, in the fall and doesn't get used. And so there's a lot of kind of trying to make ends meet that way. But as far as vineyard land, we're all kind of sharing / trying to come up with more. And so
How many plants do you put on or vines on an acre?
basically between 900 and 1,000.
Oh, so it is about, it's 4,300 an acre.
For the vines themselves, exactly. So the benefit, I think, and part of what I kind of wrote up here is that putting money into planting vines right now stays in the state. We get all of our vine material from the state. The trellising materials, some of that's sourced outside the state, but the cost of those materials is not the big issue, it's the labor. And the labor stays in the state because there are people who work already in high tensile wire fencing. It's essentially the same structure. there's a guy named Steven who has a company called Vermont Vineyards, which I put in there because he's the only guy right now putting in vineyards. And he has more work than he can actually keep up with in the state. He's got 2 people who work with him. And he's putting in, as many acres as he can every summer. And there are people in line waiting for him to do it. And he charges a lot, actually. Like, when we're putting in our trellising, we're not actually gonna work. I'll work with Steven as a consultant, but mostly he's putting in people's 2-acre plots, 3-acre plots in their backyards.
Yeah.
If we had funding to put in another 50, 60, 70 acres in the state, then that's a full-time job for a crew. Sure. To be out there trellising, and so it would be out there planting for 1 full year, which all of the vines are coming from Northeastern Vine Supply, which is Andy Farmer down in Paulette. He does all of the vine supply for the state, has his nursery down there, does an amazing job. He is also 100% available should it be of interest to speak with him. He and his family have basically provided all of the vines for propagation in the state, and could easily scale what he's doing. Labor for planting, labor for trellising, all of that would be in the state. And then the ongoing farm production would all be in the state as well, because it's really, there are a few months when we're not in the vineyard, but we prune basically in the winter. And then as soon as the growing season goes, we're off and running until harvest, and we all take a break after harvest for about a month, and then
And do you use any H2A workers? Or is it pretty much neighbors and people you local?
So we do. We don't currently, our vineyard isn't large enough. Ellison Estate had H2A workers. Some of them, they're working right now to put in housing so they can actually employ H2A on a regular basis. There's been some migrant labor work that's been used there, some at Shelburne as well. We're all, again, it's kind of getting to a point where you're over about 20 acres where it makes sense to have a labor force. There's a lot of family labor right now. Shelburne employs, I want to say, about 5 people year round right now, and they have 20 acres or so, and they're currently the largest grower in the state.
20 acres and they employ 5
Mm-hmm.
year round.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so that because they're out in the vineyard and then they're in the winery, and then and there's year-round work for both of those areas, especially if you're looking at 20, 25 acres, they're making 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 cases a year, depending on the year.
Wow.
And when you're talking 5,000 cases, and the average price for a bottle of wine from Vermont right now is high. I wish it would come down, actually, and that sounds like a strange thing to say, but I think we would. The average price outside of the state, if you picked even in the state, is probably around $35 a bottle for Vermont wine, $35. When you consider that when that leaves the state, even when it goes into distribution in the state, the grower takes about a 50% cut or hit on that, right? The $35 bottle on the shelf, I'm selling to somebody for probably $20. 25 if I'm selling it directly at wholesaler. If I'm selling it to a wholesaler, it goes down to 15, and you can kind of do the math there. So if we dramatically scale production so that we're not able to sell everything produced in Vermont, then the price back to the farmer decreases. But even if we're talking an average of $20 per bottle, splitting the difference between what goes out of the state and what stays in the state, it's still looking at, you're looking at about $30,000 an acre in production per year, which is better, I think, than a lot of crops. I don't work in other crops, so I think that's a pretty decent.
Oh, I don't know. Cannabis would give you a hard time.
Yes, it would.
It's fair. It's fair. Also difficult to grow in the state, but
It is.
yeah.
It is.
But that's some different than milk and selling milk.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. So, I don't know the solution as far as getting from here to there. Part of writing this proposal was to say, is there the possibility of state funding or support? And I think we're all kind of applying for similar USDA grants, some of the working lands grants, things like that.
Are you allowed to apply at working lanes?
Not, some of those grants are applicable for planting and for trellising and things like that. Some of them are not. So like the USDA value added producer grant, which is a big one, isn't viable. It's really the value added part. So it's really, they can help with equipment for the production of the wine. But as far as the actual planting and trellising and anything in the vineyard, it can't be applied to that. So really the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative is the only grant right now available with respect to the planting aspect, and it's pretty competitive. So this is an ongoing conversation at the Grape and Wine Council is how do we get from here to there, and chatting especially with some of the younger folks who are making wine in other people's facilities, trying to plant grapes sort of in their backyards, but not able to really kick things off because the upfront expense is so high.
See, a couple of years ago, we, had all that federal money and, but the shoe's getting a little tighter,
Totally understand that.
A little tighter.
No, I understand that. I mean, I think for us, it's really trying to offer something for the state as well, where we keep land in agriculture.
Yeah.
And it's also the aspect of pushing sort of with respect to, I know that climate concerns are huge right now for the legislature, as they should be for everyone. And grapes are one of the easier crops to farm organically with low inputs and with a decent amount of climate resiliency, because we can the grapes are relatively, the ones that we work with are already kind of built to withstand a lot of the mildew, fungal pressures, a lot of the things that we sort of tend to use inputs to prevent.
And what about like a lot of our smaller plots of land are grassed over?
Mm-hmm.
You must have to till the soil and stuff to do grapes.
Not really, honestly, and this is kind of one of the things, it varies a lot from region to region in the world with respect to how grapes are planted.
That would be important to know, because grapes must have to absorb quite a lot of water.
They honestly are pretty water, I mean, maybe the first couple of years if it's a particularly dry spot, but the amount of moisture we get in the state of Vermont is sort of enough for a vineyard planting without any sort of irrigation.
What I'm getting at is if you had a grape planted there,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the water running downhill, it would stay maybe there the grapes would require more of that, so it wouldn't end up in the river.
Oh, yeah.
Because it all runs downhill.
It all does, yeah.
And
Anything to help, yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely true as well. And as far as the plantings, we don't do, a lot of those plantings you basically need to auger down, but they don't generally require a full till of a area.
just where.
It's usually just where you're planting the vine, because the vines do better if they struggle. The vines tend to be too vigorous, and so we want them to actually not have.
So it's almost like planting saplings or trees.
Yeah, they're weeds. I mean, they want to grow. I work with a vineyard that we need to trellis because the previous owner mowed it under several times. But if you don't pull them out, they just kind of keep growing. And so now we've got a bunch of small vines on a property that is now under different ownership, and they want them trellised. And it's like, okay, the vines are still there. So unless you pull them out, they're gonna keep coming back and they're gonna want to grow. They might not make beautiful fruit if you don't prune them and maintain them, but they'll still grow.
And the pruning, is that mechanical or by hand?
It's by hand. Yeah. You can, I mean, some people do. The grapes we work with, the climate that we're in and the style of pruning we do here, it's not conducive to mechanical. Also, getting a mechanical pruner in there, you're looking at generally to start out at a better 50 to 100 acres. Otherwise, it's pretty low return on your investment of that stuff. But yeah, mechanical pruning, mechanical harvesting, is, for us, it's all by hand, which means that again, the labor needs for a few, especially in those 2 periods of time, there are entire crews in the Finger Lakes that are just there to prune. And I've talked with,
Go from one job to the next.
they'll be in a vineyard, they'll prune for a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then move on. But most of us farm our own vineyards, so we're out there pruning for 2 months to do it, you know.
That's just what you do.
Well,
Yeah, so, well, we'll, keep that in mind about looking for some money. I don't know, the Ready program, if they have any grants, sitting around, from the feds, you know, that's where they mainly look for money. There's,
Yeah.
money that's sitting on the table for agriculture or whatever.
that's been, we've had some conversations, and like I said, the farm and forest viability folks have been super helpful. I work with a couple other folks who work with Ready program, and so they've provided a lot of resources for grant writing. The challenges are kind of fitting grape growing in Vermont into into the grants that are currently available. And it's new. And we're kind of aware of that it's, the hardest part is looking at a track record, which doesn't exist. But we're kind of, we're 25 years, 30 years into grape growing in Vermont. So it's still, this is kind of the time when, if you look at most regions, I mean, Oregon, first vines in Oregon were really planted in the 60s. So we're only 20 years, really 30 years behind them. It's just that enough people took a flyer and planted a few hundred acres so that they could really launch it. I think
So
we're,
they have vineyards that big out there.
thousands. Yeah.
California even bigger.
Yeah. Oregon, I don't know what how many 100,000 acres they have planted now. But we're at, I think, 150 acres in the state right now, which,
Back
how many acres ready? You look,
when they were planting, their vineyards, we were probably 90% forested.
that's absolutely true.
Didn't have any place to plant.
Yeah.
160 vineyards in the state.
160 acres, yeah,
6 years ago.
And-
Okay.
total. Yeah, I think that's kind of where we are. We're trying to get that number updated. It's tough because a lot of them are kind of hobby vineyard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, planting a 50-acre vineyard is kind of a pretty normal thing in Oregon, and Shelburne Farms 25 acres over about 5-6 different plots. We farm the Boyden Vineyard, and that's 6 acres. Ellison just put 4 more acres in, which takes them to about 14 in one place, which is probably the largest vineyard in the state.
It's big.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how big Snow Farm is at this point, but yeah, it's, there's land too. I mean, just chatting with the land trust folks, there's a bunch of areas that they don't really know what to do with. And I think there's a lot of young farmers looking for land. It's just getting the 2 things together and the upfront expenditure, which is challenging. So I know there are a lot of people looking sort of to put their hand in the same pot at this point, and I am.
Yeah, the pots, as I said.
And the pot's getting smaller, and and this is kind of, I realize our timing isn't ideal simply because we're kind of coming at this right at the end of the COVID era of federal funding. But we can't really change the timing, and sort of the organization of the Vermont Grape and Wine Council finally is enough that we're all kind of putting our heads together and saying, why aren't we doing more of this? But really just wanted to kind of put this in front of you. If there's room for further discussion, or there's a lot of resources. Andy, like I said, he has all the nursery for everyone in the state right now. The other growers, I think, getting, either Ken or, Ethan from Shelburne to chat about sort of the financials, because they've got a pretty good history of that. Nick Lane from Snow Farm. And then I was just on the phone with Kendra, who is the current president for the Grape and Wine Council, and she just applied for the working lands to get her new acreage trellised. So,
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversation around it right now.
I think it is great that you've been in the state house, frankly, been here, and it helps. I mean, it really does. It might take a little while, but it really helps that you show up and it's amazing.
Well, I appreciate you making the time to chat because that's how we get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Some way, shape or form. So I know you're busy
Yeah, thank you.
anyway, but thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Mr. Westman. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So. Linda?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning, thanks for having me.
We're running a little bit. Were you here? We could introduce ourselves.
Yep, Brian Collmore, representing the Rutland District,
Irene Renner,
Chittenden North.
Chittenden North. I'm not Irene. I'm Brian Campion, Bennington.
I'm not Brian Keane. I'm Rich Westwood from.
We have recognized.
And I'm glad I need.
Waiting for that.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. and members
Yeah,
of the
well-
committee. My name is Amanda Hayden. I am Director of State Government Affairs for the Animal Health Institute, or AHI. AHI is the U.S. Trade Association for research-based manufacturers of animal health products, the medicines that keep your pets and livestock healthy. Our members develop, manufacture, and distribute a range of animal health products, including pharmaceuticals, biologics such as vaccines, flea and tick preventatives, and medical devices, including diagnostics to veterinarians, pet owners, and food and livestock owners. We've been very vocal in Maine and Minnesota about the PFAS issue. And I'm not sure how much you know about what the other states have done on this issue thus far, but Maine and Minnesota are two states that have passed very broad bans on PFAS in products that haven't taken effect yet. But our issue with the legislation in those two states, as well as the bill that's over in the House here, is the way that they're defining PFAS and not putting any meaningful exemptions in for products that have an unavoidable use of PFAS. So when you define PFAS as a class of fluorinated organic chemicals containing at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom, which is the way it is in Maine, Minnesota, and the House bill here. It can include a lot of things that you probably would think would be roped into this big umbrella with such a broad definition, such as the active ingredient in, for example, human and veterinary inhalant anesthetics, oral flea and tick medications, other pharmaceuticals approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, federally regulated packaging components, pharmaceuticals, biologics, and medical devices, and the active ingredients in topical flea and tick products and some EPA-approved polymers. So we know that some PFAS chemistries are harmful. That's been proven. But the active ingredients in animal health products have gone through federally required rigorous safety testing before reaching the market, including evaluating the safety effects on animals, humans, and the environment. So as I mentioned, there's legislation in the House Committee on Human Services, HB 544, that would ban products with intentionally added PFAS unless they're deemed unavoidable use, effective in 2032. So this follows in the footsteps of Maine and Minnesota. As I mentioned, those laws are very similar to what's being proposed here. Our concern with defining PFAS so broadly and then using that definition for regulatory purposes is that it encompasses thousands of different chemistries, something like 18,000 different chemical combinations that qualifies PFAS under that definition. But the important thing is, and if there's one thing I wish that everybody across the country would understand, it's that the mere presence of a fully fluorinated carbon atom does not make a chemistry inherently dangerous. It is possible, and in fact, it's been done and demonstrated through the kind of extensive federally required testing that goes into bringing in animal health products to market, that these products are safe. So just to give a little overview of how our products are regulated. Our drugs are regulated by the FDA, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Biologics, which are vaccines mostly, are regulated by the USDA under the U.S. Virus Serum Toxin Act. Flea and tick preventatives are regulated by EPA. So those would be like flea and tick collars, oral and topical flea and tick preventatives. So the regulatory responsibility is divided up among these agencies, but all animal health products are subject to intense federal oversight and regulatory frameworks focusing on safety and impact the animal, humans, and the environment. So before any veterinary medicine can reach the market, manufacturers demonstrate that it's safe for the animal, safe for the person administering it, for consumers, especially for products used in livestock, food animals, and for the environment. A core part of this process is the environmental risk assessment, which evaluates if there are any potential impacts on the wider environment, including beneficial organisms such as earthworms and aquatic species. All parasiticides have to pass this environmental risk assessment and may require rigorous testing before they can receive a regulatory approval and be sold. The other issue with the Maine and Minnesota statutes is the uses of PFAS in these animal health products, as I've mentioned, they've been extensively tested, they're safe, but they're also currently unavoidable. Oral parasiticide products simply would not exist without the use of the chemicals defined as PFAS. These PFAS chemistries are the active pharmaceutical ingredients in these products because of their unique characteristics. So even if we could identify alternatives to using those active pharmaceutical ingredients, it takes years of research and data submission, 15 to 20 years, to bring that to the regulatory bodies and get a change made to your product formulation. I've got a list of the effects this type of ban would have on veterinary medicines, and it's really pretty astonishing that it's so broad. So veterinary medicines, including oral and topical parasiticide products that use chemicals defined as PFAS, has the active pharmaceutical ingredient and all raw materials, intermediates, and reagents in a broad sense. The biggest one I think is probably the inhalant anesthetics, and that goes for both humans and animals. It's a little bit of a complicated issue, but they qualify as PFAS under the definition in HB 544. They're approved by the FDA, and without these inhalant anesthetics, the routine and more complex surgeries in animals would become impossible because there are no equivalent alternatives, leading to avoidable suffering and even unnecessary euthanasia of animals. There are injectable anesthetics available, but they don't tend to be as stable or as long lasting. So for complex surgeries, you really need inhalant anesthetics. There's also non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs approved by FDA, used in livestock and companion animals. Sometimes they have a longer lasting effect than other NSAIDs, and that's why they're preferred. Manufacturing equipment, manufacturing diagnostic equipment, the list goes on and on of places where PFAS can be found, and there's a reason that it's there, it has function, technical reason. And again, going back to Maine and Minnesota and the bill that's been proposed here in the House, it's two issues. It's the fact that PFAS is being defined so broadly that it brings in drugs, medical devices, human and animal. We're kind of a good example of this in terms of being a more niche area, and we can really flesh out how it affects us. But if you had a hearing on HB 544, you'd probably hear very similar testimony to what I was just giving from the human diagnostics, human drugs. It affects a lot more of us than just animal health, but this is the Agriculture Committee, and we thought it'd be appropriate to fill you guys in on where it stands, because it would affect obviously your farmers, pet owners, having a difficult time accessing those products. And the second thing I was saying is the definition of PFAS. It's also the issue of what's an unavoidable use. So the bill here, just like Minnesota and Maine, does have provisions in it for the Department of Health to determine that a product is that a current use of PFAS is unavoidable. They've just started that process in Maine and Minnesota. They've done requests for comments. They haven't started official formal rulemaking, but they're asking industries to send them their lists of what products are currently unavoidable use of PFAS, and then they're going to determine how they exempt those products from their ban, because their laws have a ban as well, just like the one that's here in 544. So we're not sure exactly what's going to happen in Maine and Minnesota as far as what they'll consider an unavoidable use. And the other difficulty with that is not every state is necessarily going to make the same determination about what is an unavoidable use. So you look at a situation where products may be banned in one state, not in the next state. And where does that leave the animal health industry as well as consumers and animals? It's the animals that suffer when products that they need to prevent flea infestations, et cetera, disappear from the market, especially the inhalant anesthetics. There would be no substitute at all for that.
And,
Okay, sure. This is very helpful. So they're all in the process right now defining what unavoidable is through a rulemaking process or something like that. and I should know the answer to this question, but are all PFAS forever chemicals?
It's, again, it's how you define PFAS.
Okay.
So the reason that PFAS chemicals are used in a lot of drugs, medical devices, et cetera, is that they're very stable. They're very difficult bonds to break. How long exactly they last, I don't know if it's forever. But you know, when you put your spot on treatment on your dog, you want it to stay on for a few days.
So this is like
That's what
the,
makes it.
okay, got it.
See, it almost sounds like there should be this should be a national issue. I mean, you get out in the west where states are huge, miles to the border. But like us in Vermont, in an hour, we can be in two different states, and like where Brian is within 15 minutes, he can be in Massachusetts, up north we can be in New York or Maine, so shouldn't that be a regional type discussion on?
Or even federal. I mean, there's
Federal.
there's discussion at the EPA, they have a roadmap.
They can't even give themselves a pay raise down there, they fight over that, So, I mean, I don't know if there's any hope, for federal, but I would think that the New England states could at least get together and come up with a common, law that would, help all of us.
Right, I'm not sure what the approach would be in a regional type law. Most states have, I should say, there's a couple states that have passed PFAS statutes that didn't go as broad as Maine and Minnesota. And for Colorado, but they targeted specific types of products. And I think there's a couple of other states that are moving in that direction, where instead of saying anything with PFAS, it would be clothing, textiles, rugs, upholstered furniture, firefighting film. Obviously, that's been banned in a lot of states.
And I think we passed that bill last year.
Think you
in
might
this-
have.
Yeah, it was product related money.
So a more targeted approach.
Yeah.
That's basically what we're saying at the end of the day is our products have already been safety tested. There's thousands of PFAS in countries. Some have a known safety profile, as do ours. And therefore, why take the bureaucratic, approach of making people give you a list of what those are and then deciding what you're gonna ban down the road when FDA, EPA, USDA have already, done the testing and figured out that these are safe. Why not narrow the umbrella of the PFAS chemicals that you're trying to target with a different definition that doesn't include drugs and medical devices and drugs and parasiticides and things that we don't have another formula for.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What are the effective dates in those other two states?
So Minnesota's ban goes into effect in 2032, I think. Maine's 2030.
Oh, that's
23rd?
interesting.
Yeah, but they have provisions in them as well to ban specific types of products, and those take effect over here,
And
like the clothing.
The clothing, like the one we passed
New
last year.
York just did something, I thought.
I don't know if they passed something, they do have a bill.
Questions,
No,
committee?
no, yeah.
Well, I hope if that bill makes it over this way, that you guys will be looking out for the agriculture community, and that's that we need for our areas.
Well, the bill that we're dealing with is over in health and welfare, but it's got the ag portion in that, and I believe, we're gonna have to come to some resolution next week, or shortly thereafter.
Senator Starr, does that have anything though, connected to animals in terms of animal medicine in it, do you know? Or is that, this is the pesticide one, right?
The PFAS.
Oh, 197.
Yeah, does that have anything in it that would prevent the use of this kind of thing?
I don't think so. So the
Okay.
thing about SB 197 is it does try to take a more targeted approach.
Okay,
It lists specific chemicals and it also has certain concentrations and has some requirements about packaging. But it's no sort of broad ban. It just doesn't say, everything with PFAS. So we haven't taken a position on that. I don't believe that it would affect technology.
so the one that you're really watching is the one in the House right now.
Yes,
Do you know if that's active?
it's still sitting in committee. It has not had a hearing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for.
Are you visiting
coming by.
Vermont or?
Now, I live in Virginia, so I
Oh,
came
okay.
out just
All right.
to stop you.
All right, great. Wish we had snowier weather for you.
I was here actually 6 years ago,
Yeah,
and I can't remember, it was like February,
yeah.
similar time, and it must have been 4 feet of snow on the ground.
Well, good. At least you got some.
The entire time I was here.
Good, good.
So I've been there. Okay.
Tell those Virginians to keep coming up skiing.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Good to meet you.
Well, committee, I think
I
we're,
think we have one more.
We do. She's on Zoom waiting.
all,
Hi.
Oh, Dr. Bennett.
yeah, we got 10 minutes. There's a couple of us will be in another committee. Morning,
Good
Doc.
morning. Good morning.
Good.
Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it. I think I'm here this morning to fill you in on what happened in the Fifth Circuit arguments earlier this week on Monday regarding the fluorinated containers.
Yeah.
So I listened to the oral arguments. It was a panel of 3 judges. One of the judges was an Obama appointment, one was a Trump appointment, and one was a George W. Bush appointment. The Obama judge did not ask any questions or say anything. The other 2 judges were openly hostile to the Department of Justice, who was representing EPA. And although they have not yet issued their ruling, it was abundantly clear to all of the press and all of the people listening that they will be overturning EPA's 2 orders on fluorinated containers. So that is a highly likely outcome. Again, it's not definite. We're waiting for their opinion. It should come out this month, the month of February, so we will be seeing it shortly. But all of us firmly believe that they will be overturning those orders. So the fact that you are trying to address the fluorinated container issue in your bill, I think is critically important.
And their ruling though was to do away with the rule that EPA can't determine that.
So what happened was in December of 2023, EPA issued 2 orders under TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act, saying you must stop fluorinating containers by February 28th, 2024, because of all of these PFAS, including PFOA that you're creating. The argument in front of the Fifth Circuit hinged on a technicality really on whether this was a new use and whether the company had fair notice. So the way TSCA works is that EPA issues these rules called SNURS, or Significant New Use Rules, and they issued one in 2020 that said, if you're manufacturing these long chain PFAS, you need to let us know within 60 days so we can, or 90 days, I forget what it was, so we can tell you whether or not you can continue. Otherwise, they're going to be outlawed, because they were trying to stop the manufacture of these PFAS like PFOA. Enhance never responded to that rule. And they are now arguing that it's not a new use under the significant new use rule, although new is not, it was a very wonky, technical, legal argument about what the definition of new is. And the court seemed to think that it should be EPA's burden to personally notify every chemical manufacturer who's manufacturing these PFAS. Well, of course, EPA doesn't have that information, and there's no way that they could have that information, which is why they put these out for notice and comment. And any responsible company would keep track of what EPA is doing to see if they're going to be regulated. That's what the whole notice and comment rulemaking is about. But it does appear clear that this court will rule that EPA did not properly give notice to Enhanced Technologies, and therefore they should not have to comply with this rule. So Our fear is that this fluorination practice will continue until we get at it some other way. I'd also like to point out, though, that I understand you received a letter yesterday or today from a company called BP Polymers, BPP. They are the company, when EPA first went after Clark mosquito, because that was when I discovered PFAS in pesticides, it was Anvil 1010, which was manufactured by Clark. At that point, we thought it was part of the ingredients. We didn't know it was contamination from the barrels. Once EPA figured out it was contamination from the plastic containers, they went after Clark. They took an enforcement action against Clark and forced Clark to pull all of their mosquitocide off the shelves and use a different container. Well, Clark turned to BP Polymers, and EPA approved the use of that container for pesticides. And they did write you a letter to say, we are here, we don't create PFAS, our plastic containers are able to contain these harsh chemicals and aggressive chemicals. They're great for pesticides. EPA has already approved the use for Clark. We can do it for other pesticides. So the argument that there's not an alternative is gone. There is an alternative. It's an alternative that's been approved by EPA, and we know that there's no PFAS involved because there's no fluorine used in their method of making this barrier.
Well, that's good to know that at least there is a product out there that companies could use.
Right.
Yeah.
They have no excuse to continue using these fluorinated containers now that we know that there is an alternative that's been approved by EPA and is currently being used by some of the pesticide manufacturers. There's no excuse to continue using those. And if I may just address what your last witness said, I completely disagree with her. There was an article that just came out today or yesterday, I think, in The Guardian, where vets are urging people to not use these flea and tick prevention medicines because they're finding them in all of the rivers and streams. And one of them is fipronil that I testified about before. When EPA approves a pesticide, they're approving the active ingredients. They're not approving the inerts for safety. So to say that these pesticides are safe because EPA said they are, first of all, that's not true. As we know, there was also another article that just came out yesterday or today about dicamba. A court just overturned EPA's approval of 3 pesticides because they don't do it right. But again, they only do the risk assessment and the safety and assessment on those active ingredients. And often these PFAS are not in there as active ingredients, and they're not looking at PFAS as one of those ingredients that they're looking at the safety of. Because PFAS chemistry is so complicated, you can have a pesticide or a chemical that has PFAS in it that they're precursors to PFOA. So they will actually turn into those nasty PFAS that are killing us and that are harming, farms and our food supply and our water supply. So to rely on EPA to keep us safe from these pesticides is I think a big mistake, especially given the court decisions over the past few days, and this new study that just came out about these flea and tick medicines. You can make these medicines, these veterinary medicines, without PFAS. There are alternatives. Yes, there are some essential uses. For example, Paxlovid is a PFAS. Is there a way? They're looking for a way to figure out an anti-COVID, a drug that will help with COVID that's not a PFAS. Flonase, Prozac, those are PFAS. They're looking for them. But all these vet medicines, it's not clear that it's necessary to have PFAS in there. And they did not assess PFAS part of it when they said, yes, this is safe. And they don't even do the pesticide part of it, the active ingredient part, right? So relying on EPA, I do think, is a mistake. And I do hope that you do go through with this bill and approve of it favorably, because it is very, very important for forward-thinking states like Vermont to try to protect their farmers and your soil and your food supply and your water.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks for the follow-up.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot, for the follow-up, and we'll, stay in touch.
I'm going to submit my comments from last time and today in writing in just a few minutes. I just wanted to make sure that I captured everything that I had said both times, but I will submit those to you today.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks again. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, you're good ahead.
Yeah, is there anything else from the committee?
No, thank you.
No? You guys all set?
All set.
Yeah, well, we'll adjourn.